What's up, you guys? I hope this finds you well. Welcome back. This is episode 3 of the Locomotion show, and this week we're going to talk all about mindset. I think about mindset as the collection of stories that we tell ourselves, in this case, about training and about our bodies, that really determine where training lives in our brain, what kind of beliefs we have about our bodies, and whether the work that we're going to do actually has the kind of impact that we want or not. I recently was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, and I heard Joe talk about how training is the process of overcoming his inner bitch, which I thought was kind of funny, but at the same time really pretty sad, because I think that's so indicative of how our culture thinks about training. It's all about the grind. It's all about how we're really naturally lazy, we're naturally inclined to just be slobs, and what we got to do is just grind ourselves, convince ourselves, motivate ourselves, and only the most motivated individuals are the ones that succeed, and everybody else just kind of sucks. And if that's a story that we're telling ourselves, for one, it's a lie. It doesn't work that way. Training's never worked that way. And for two, we're bound to fail, because motivation is something that's in short supply for all human beings. What we need to do is we've got to get back to putting training in its rightful place, integrated into life. A habitual, automated, or even reflexive part of life. And when we do that, training is going to become this thing that we look forward to, that we can't wait for, that we anticipate, and that's going to mean we do it way more frequently, we do it with passion, and we get the outcomes that we want. In the 15 years that I've been coaching athletes, from Olympians to everyday moms and dads, from rock climbers, big mountain skiers to baseball players, the one thread that I see in common amongst all athletes who are successful with their training is habits. Athletes that have training as a habit have vastly greater success with their training over the long run than athletes who rely on motivation and decisions. That may seem like a very subtle or even like a semantic, just a word choice difference. It's not. Habits and decisions exist in totally different parts of the brain, and they rely on totally different mechanisms to get them going. So habits exist in the basal ganglia, and that part of the brain is responsible for things like emotions, for memories, and most interestingly, for pattern recognition. That's where you want to put training. You want to put it in this part of the brain that is preoccupied with pattern recognition. Think about drinking coffee in the morning. When you fire up your coffee machine, you hear that sound, you smell the grounds. That's a pattern that your brain has learned to recognize and to get excited about and to make decisions in sequence of. So as soon as the first thing happens, you wake up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you know what comes next. And if you find yourself walking out the door without your cup of coffee, well, it's pretty unlikely that that'll even happen if coffee's part of your daily habit, because you would have had to trip over all of these patterns that your brain has become accustomed to recognizing. That's where you want exercise. If you put exercise into the decision-making part of the brain, it looks like this. You wake up in the morning, you think, oh, it's raining outside. God, it's kind of cold. I don't know. Running doesn't sound that sweet. Maybe I should try to go to the gym. Wonder what time it opens. Shucks, my kit's not ready. I only have my running kit. All of that process, those are all just series of decisions that are they're just a heavy lift for the brain. They're exhausting. The more decisions that you have to make, less likely that you are to get the outcome that you came for. What you want to do is you want to move training into this automated, reflexive, coffee-making kind of part of the brain. In order to be successful with training, I always think it helps to go back and look at the big picture, the long view of how humans, over the millennia that we've been on this planet, how we figured this problem out. And what we find when we think about it that way is that today, exercise plays a completely different role than it ever has before. And that's because exercise, for the first time in human history, is now separate from daily life. Most people who live in technologically advanced societies can go about their day without relying on any athleticism at all. Whereas for most of human history, athleticism has been key to survival. And even beyond survival, it's been key to communication, it's been key to social connection. Whereas today, exercise is in this no man's land. We have work life, we have family life. Oh, and then there's this other thing that I gotta do. It's this duty that I gotta somehow fit in in the context of my really busy life. When I do it, I'm going to do it in this very grinding kind of a way. I'm going to repeat these two-dimensional movements over and over again till I'm bored to tears and my muscles are screaming. And then I'll know, because I'm smoked, that I got a great session. And if I'm totally worked and I can barely open my car door, I must have had a great training session. That doesn't make any sense from an evolutionary perspective. What we want to do is we want to get back to reintegrating training into our life. What does that mean? It means it should play the same role as it always has. For such a long part of our life on this planet, humans have learned to be athletic in order to hunt. For the last 2 million years, our journey towards running was really driven by hunting. Well, think about hunting. Hunting is naturally going to be fun. It's a puzzle. It's a challenge. Can I outsmart my prey? That's the kind of stimulation that the brain needs in order to fall in love with the body, to fall in love with the challenges of coordination, strength, power, and all these things, rather than isolating them to this really random environment called a gym where we just do the same thing over and over again. So what we got to do is get back to making training really fun and integrating it into our lives. My first strategy for helping reestablish training in the right mindset and to make training a habit and not a grind is to make it fun. It's really as simple as that. When we look around the gym today, we see people who are moving in ways that aren't fun at all. They're really repetitive and they're very two-dimensional. They're often just isolating one joint at a time, doing the same movement till the muscle's exhausted. That's got nothing to do with athleticism, but it's got everything to do with aesthetics. And our society today tells us, hey, this is what men should look like and this is what women should look like. You should have these muscles in these proportions. That's what looks like health. That makes no sense. And that is what's driving so much of training being a grind and training being something that's really a slave to this arbitrary aesthetic. When we look at human athleticism over the long course of human existence on the planet, we see these very athletic patterns that show up. Running, jumping, throwing, catching, fighting. These are the patterns that are woven into so many of the sports that we do. And the reason that sport is so much fun is that it's not just about producing a lot of force in a single dimension over and over again. That's boring. But being athletic, being coordinated, being agile, outsmarting our opponents, that stuff is fun. Training should look that way. It should replicate those innate patterns of movement. Strategy number 2 is make training daily. Carve out time every day to move. The reason that daily is so important is that habit formation is all about pattern recognition. And the more that you can build a pattern around training to where it fits in your life every day, the more likely you are to stay regular with it, and the easier it's going to be for the brain to anticipate it and therefore to do all the things that it takes to get ready for it. Making it daily makes it easy. The third strategy around changing our mindset around training and making training a habit is going to be to make training easy. That might sound really counterintuitive because supposedly training is supposed to be really hard. Well, no, not necessarily. Training has to be frequent for it to matter. If it's going to be frequent, then the barrier to entry has to be low. If you tell yourself, hey, it doesn't count unless I run 7 miles, it's not worth it unless I can train for 45 minutes, then by definition, you're going to do it way less frequently. What we want to do to ensure that we keep the frequency high is to make the barrier to entry low. So start by making training easy. Go out there and get a 5-minute session in, get a 7-minute session in, get a 20-minute session in. It doesn't really matter. Over time, you can adjust what fits in the box that you've created, that is that 5, 7, 20-minute block. You can change that. You can make it a 2-hour block. You could change it from running to strength training. All of those options are available to you once you have it as a daily habit. So in order to make it daily habit, you got to make it easy. One of the biggest barriers to making it easy that I see is that nowadays, for some reason, everybody who trains believes it only counts if I measure it. I have to count the number of reps. I've got to have my wearable device on. I got to wear my whoop. I got to have a heart rate monitor. Throw all of that stuff out. None of that stuff matters. Humans haven't been measuring exercise for 6 million years. Why do all of a sudden does it only count if we measure it? Sure, there can be great reasons to measure exercise, but if that becomes this arbitrary standard by which we measure ourselves and this way that we use to cast guilt and shame on ourselves for not reaching a certain standard, then it's getting in the way of us being successful with our training. Let's make it easy. I started this episode by talking about how the stories that we tell ourselves determine the choices that we make. And that if we're going to be successful with training, and by successful I mean fall in love with it, really enjoy it, look forward to it, anticipate it, do it with friends, make it something that's a highlight of our life as opposed to a grind and a chore, then we've got to rewrite the story of how training fits into our life. And when we look at the long scheme of human evolution, we see that humans have been playing and using their bodies to do fun stuff for as long as we've been on the planet. For a while it was for survival, then it became for social cohesion, and now it's for sport. But let's make sure that it's fun, let's make sure that it's integrated into our lives so we do it daily, and let's lower the barrier to entry so that we can all get back to being athletes. Because that's the bottom line, right? Is that as human beings, we are athletes. We all deserve to move our bodies and enjoy the physical capabilities that we were born with. And that's the kind of mindset that's going to set us up for long-term success. In the next episode, we're going to take a deep dive into the evolutionary case for endurance. When we look at all of the different ways that humans are athletic, there's really one way that stands out in the animal kingdom. That's our capacity for endurance. We're going to look at the evolutionary path that got us there. Okay, thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you next time.